First, I'd just like to say that we see biofuels as something that has tremendous promise. And the big question for us as an environmental group and for many other environmental groups is, how do we measure the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions from these fuels, and what is the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions? And so when you're talking about life cycle emissions for something like a petroleum product, one way that they tend to describe it is the wells to wheels life cycle analysis. So you're looking at the process from extraction to the transportation to the place where it's going to be refined and then burned, and then what its emissions are coming out of the tailpipe. When you're talking about biofuels, it's more of a fields to wheels analysis that you're doing. So you're looking at what types of fertilizers were put on the land, what types of crop practices were used, and then going into, again, how was it refined? Did they use coal to produce the energy to refine it, or did they use natural gas? And so what that does is it has the person who is developing the product, putting it onto the market, it makes them take a look at every step in the process and say, how can we minimize greenhouse gas emissions from our process, from the beginning through the end? And so one of the things that we see is a very good change that occurred through the work that the Advanced Biofuels Task Force did was that, as Mark said, they tied the tax exemptions and the blending requirements to the specific percentage reductions in life cycle greenhouse gas emissions that were set forth in the renewable fuel standard from the federal legislation, the Energy Independence and Security Act. And so what that means is, in the case of the tax exemption for cellulosic ethanol, you're requiring 60% reduction in life cycle emissions as compared to the life cycle greenhouse gas emissions of petroleum or gasoline in that case. And it's got what's called a continuing incentive, which means that the amount of the tax exemption depends on the proportion of the fuel that's being replaced with the cellulosic ethanol. So the more ethanol you put in, the more of a tax exemption you get. With the biodiesel for heating oil, it requires a 50% reduction, and with the biodiesel for engines, it's again a 60% reduction. No. Or is it backwards?
Well, you're saying that's what the bill said?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was actually an error. It's been changed.
Oh, it has. Okay, so it's 50 for both of the biodiesel. Okay. Okay, so 50% for both of those. So that's a really important change. And as Mark said, we view this as an interim step in moving towards what's called a low carbon fuel standard. And that's something that has been pioneered by California. And what they're trying to do is, instead of looking at the particular feedstock that the fuel is made from, whether it comes from petroleum or whether it comes from sugarcane or algae, they're looking at what is the carbon content of this fuel. And so in my mind, what that does is put all of the fuels on a level playing field and say, okay, from beginning to end, how much greenhouse gas emissions are we getting from these? Who can make a blend that's going to have the least impact on the environment? And then in their case, they're going to try to set up a credit and trading program. That's something that's pretty complex, and I don't know if we're going to be tackling that in Massachusetts or not. But that's the basic idea that we're hoping to see coming down the road here in Massachusetts and in New England.